At this hour, Joe Biden leads President Trump by 253 electoral votes to 213. He's just 17 short of the 270 he needs to clinch victory. Some unresolved races in key states will determine the outcome under the American system. That is frequently the case. You may recall back in 2000, it all came down to Florida. President George W. Bush won the state and therefore the presidency by just 537 votes of the more than 6 million cast. These now infamous paper punch card ballots played a critical role in making that election so difficult to call. CBS News senior political analyst and 60 Minutes correspondent John Dickerson joins us now. John, we all remember the anxiety that played out over weeks in the aftermath of that election. As we know, I mean, nationally, it was 500,000 votes that divided the two out of 100 million cast. I think that the split in the electoral college vote was literally like 4 or 5 electoral votes.
It was quite small, and it all came down to Florida. Florida was going to determine who the president was going to be, and I think that image was of Judge Robert Rosenberg in Broward County, who was holding up the spyglass like Sherlock Holmes looking at those.
I still remember that shot, John.
Yeah,
I still remember it.
And we just taking it, but going back one little beat is what initiated the craziness was that it was first called for Al Gore, and all the networks who were in a race back then. And Anthony Salvanto, who is our elections director, is so cautious in part because of the scalding of that time. Everybody called it for Gore. And they said it was too close to call. Then they called it for Bush. Gore called Bush and conceded. Then everybody moved it back to too close to call. Gore receded the concession. So it was madness leading into this 5-week period of counting.
What did we learn from that relative to today?
Well, hopefully we learned in the press to not call states before they're ready to go.
We have learned that. We are not calling it.
Right, and that's why everybody's being so cautious here.
Go ahead.
Well, one quick thing, though, is that what we also learned, though, is in the political process, you can shape it outside of the structure for counting. You know, there was a lot of effort in the kind of theater of public opinion to shape the outcome of the vote counting.
Well, let's talk about that theater, actually, because that's what I'm interested in. In 2000, there was something called the Brooks Brothers riot, where gentlemen in suits with sort of tasseled loafers, Republican operatives and lawyers disrupted a canvassing meeting in Miami-Dade County. This time around, the protests are not Brooks Brothers. There's kind of flak jackets and Trump flags. But how do those demonstrations potentially impact what's going on in these rooms and with the courts?
Right. Well, as you just focusing just on the theater of what people are wearing, it's gotten more kind of hardcore. The Brooks Brothers riot was given that name in part because it was operatives from out of state trying to make it look like or pretend that this was a grassroots uprising. The big other difference is that was a recount in Florida. Okay, there was an automatic recount process in Florida. This went beyond that, and I won't get into the details, but the votes had been counted. What's happening with President Trump is he's asking the votes stop being counted for the first time. So that's a big difference there. And also, everything is just so much more tense and electrified now than it was back then. And you see so many more. At the time in 2000, people were crying bloody murder on both sides. But there were norms that were in place of politics, and there was a line between politics and some people would say that line was eroded a little bit by the decision, and certainly the line between the Supreme Court and politics, because the decision of the Supreme Court, 5-4 by the conservatives in favor of the Republican president, that eroded the wall between the Supreme Court and politics. But where we are now is much different, and most of those walls are down.
It does feel that so many people are on edge and so angry on both sides. What does it say, this close race, say about the makeup of both parties?
We are in a very partisan moment in America. If you want to look at the good side, look at how many people turned out. And they adapted in a pandemic. And they participated. And so that's great. The reason we have elections is so we don't have fisticuffs in the street. So, and by the way, all these states, even though it's taking a little time, they're doing a great job. They're counting the votes. There isn't kind of the madness of looking at hanging chads and dimpled chads. And the systems have gotten better. So that's all good. And we'll see how we resolve it. But back to your original point, Gail, we're in a very polarized country in which people's beliefs line up with their parties. And we have actors, the president in particular, who uses that partisanship very successfully to gain political power and maintain it. That's in part what politics is. But unlike in previous generations, people are pushing the edges of what's acceptable. And when you are on the losing side of that, if there's not a political way to solve those problems, people take to the streets.
And now we could have a Democratic president and a Republican Senate and another form of paralysis, in effect.
Yes, form of paralysis, or everybody says we got to get something done, so maybe we might work together. There is the faintest glimmer that might happen, if only because Joe Biden, a creature of the Senate, and Mitch McConnell, who will be the Republican leader, they've worked together before. I'm not saying that it's going to be peaches and cream, but they at least have met across the table for difficult negotiations many times before. And if you read Mitch McConnell's book about being in the Senate, he's actually quite he says nice things.
I remember the beer summit. I would like to see a peaches and cream summit.
Peaches and cream summit.
President Biden.
Yeah.
Collaboration is possible, John, isn't it? It's possible.
It is possible.
It's possible.
I don't want to go overboard, but I'm trying to kindle some tiny light here in the darkness.
All right. John Dickerson, thanks very much.